Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the What's Up Wednesday, How to Run a Tabletop Game Design Workshop at Your Library webinar with John Mulligan, owner of ENNIE-nominated. My name is George Bergstrom, and I'm the Southern Regional Coordinator for the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office, and I'll be the question moderator for today. This webinar is being co-sponsored by the American Library Association's Games and Gaming Roundtable. I'd like to start off the webinar with a few quick announcements. To register for other webinars or other trainings available from the Professional Development Office, please see the Indiana State Library's events calendar, which can be found on our website at www.in.gov/library. GameRT would also like to announce that the call for proposals for their 2026 March Minicon is now open. The Minicon will be on March 20th, a free virtual event, and the theme is Gaming Outside the Box. I'll be dropping a link for the blog article with all the details in the chat. Today's session is 1 hour, so you'll receive 1 LEU for today. If you are watching the archived recording of this webinar, the instructions on how to obtain your LEUs are available in the video's description on YouTube. Or you can also find those instructions on the Indiana State Library's continuing education site under the LEU policies. I'll now turn it over to John.
All right, good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about how to run a tabletop game design session at your library. And I'm John. I make games. I try to make sort of weird, quirky games that blend storytelling and structured mechanisms. So Exclusion Zone Botanist is probably the most well-known, where you're exploring a mutating strange forest and drawing and sketching the plants there, or everything all the way to You Are a Muffin, where it's sort of a cozy journaling game where you're a pastry in a coffee shop, watching customers come and go as you slowly become more stale, waiting to be eaten. So they are all self-contained game books. So if you're familiar with role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, it's sort of that theme. They're largely solo games that you could play by yourself. I also write about games at a site called Skeleton Code Machine. It's a website I post every Tuesday and just sort of nerd out about game mechanisms. And that has spawned 2 guides. And one of them is Make Your Own One-Page Role-Playing Game. And that has a direct link to what we'll be talking about in teaching game design at libraries. And the other one is more focused on role-playing games and making adventures specifically for those. I also publish a print quarterly magazine. It's called Tumulus, and it's more game design, inspiration, playable mechanisms, and all sorts of things that if you enjoy making games or playing games, it's really focused on that kind of thing. It's very similar to Skeleton Code Machine. And I've become really interested in gaming in classrooms and libraries. One of the things I was able to do is contribute a game. It's to Roll for Learning. It originally started with some Carnegie Mellon people, and I ended up contributing a game called Bird Detectives that's really made for ages 6 to 9, maybe early literacy, and creating a game that can work in classroom or educational settings. So and with that, I really now spend some time trying to encourage others to make weird little games. It started with going into my local library in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, and saying, hey, I make games. Would you be interested if I taught a free class over a couple sessions? And it was literally just me walking up to the front desk and asking the person there. They put me in contact with the right people. Next thing you know, I was running some sessions. So, and that session was really well attended. It ended up picking up the Best Adult Program in Basic Literacy from the Pennsylvania Libraries Association. Got some awards. We had like 26 people probably in there over the course of 4 weeks, and we learned all sorts of stuff. It was a really exciting experience for me. So with that, I did a follow-up one on focus specifically this time on Make Your Own One-Page RPG. And that one had a more focused output. So we went from people who had never made a game before in their lives, to everybody in that class was a game designer by the end. Two people ended up commercially publishing their things, at least on a small scale. One of them is going to be part of the Tiny Tome collection coming up. And then recently, not specifically at a library, but I was a guest speaker at Dickinson College, again, doing almost like a crash course in helping them make some games that will be part of their curriculums. One was a history of gaming course, and the other was a interactive media, activist media course. So here's the plan. We have about an hour together, and I want to focus on 5 specific tips that if you are at a library or you're a game design person and you want to run a class, what are the 5 things that I would recommend that you do to make it successful? We have limited time, so I'm not going to be able to get into too much detail here. It's not going to be a full, like, packaged course or something that you could take with you. But I will have some resources at the end that you can share, or that I'll share, so you can learn some more. And I'm going to make sure there's some time at the end, maybe 5 or 10 minutes for questions. But as George said, if you have questions, just throw them in the chat as you think of them. That way you don't have to worry about forgetting it by the end. So if I'm doing my job, you should be able to do 5 things by the end of this. You should be able to define the scope of your workshop. You should be able to choose some topics that are going to work well for it. You should be able to pick a format, either single session or multi-session. You should have some ideas for hands-on activities to keep people engaged and interested. And you should have some ideas on how do you promote this thing so people actually show up. So let's get started. First, I want to just at least mention why game design belongs in libraries. I think if you have joined this webinar, you're already on board with this, but sometimes you do need to be able to explain, hey, why do games that are not specifically books, why do they belong in a library? And to me, I think it's 3 things, because they have specific benefits to the individual, to the library, and to the community at large. On an individual level, doing game design, even the most basic game design, helps with things like critical thinking. It builds those social emotional learning skills for SEL curriculums, where you learn how to interact with people, make critical decisions, how to build some of those relationships. Obviously, there's math and logic, and also there's an element of confidence that comes from this. It switches someone's mindset from I play games, I consume things, to I make games, that I am the originator, I am actually doing something. And I think there's value in that. At the next level, I think there's benefits for the library. Number 1, it's programming that you could scale and adapt to any size or resources. You can run a really tiny one if you have limited space. You could run a large class if you have the resources and room for it. It also expands the view of the library from something you passively consume, that you go there and you rent things and you read a book, to a place that you can go create things. Hey, I'm going to go there and I'm going to learn how to do something, and I'll have made a game by the end of it. It has measurable engagement. You can actually track attendance and things to show engagement in the library. And I think it has a chance to bring in different people to the library. Certainly, there's a core group that's going to go to the library no matter what, but this might get a new person in when they see a flyer or promotion, and get new people now involved in that library and involved in that community. And finally, at a high level, doing game design workshops really helps the community at large. Number 1, participants get to meet and share their ideas. Just from me running the classes, I had no idea that there were established game designers, new game designers in my area. And it's been one of the best things from it is all the connections I've made. Also, there's a chance to make connections with local schools, tie in your friendly local game stores. It's a positive activity for a whole range of ages. And it's pretty low barrier inclusive access. Most people can attend. The classes that I've run are all free, so everyone can join in on that. And you have a chance to build a gaming community in your local area. So I will say the Games and Gaming Roundtable Association, or Roundtable, has a page on this, on why have games in libraries. They do a far better job explaining this than I do. They have a whole FAQ section there, so I would encourage you to check that out. All right, so let's get into some actual practical advice. So workshop tip number 1 is how to choose the scope of your workshop. So here's the problem. Tabletop game design is this wide area. It has everything from board games to card games, people who want to play Monopoly and people who want to play super heavy Euro games. You have Dungeons and Dragons players and people who just want to play Whist and Hearts and classic card games, right? So how do you design something that's going to appeal to everyone? So that's one of the things that I had to think about in running some classes is sort of the largest divide is going to be between board games and RPGs. And you'll just so I could define it, I will say TTRPG quite a bit. That's a tabletop role-playing game. So they're at the right side of this sort of spectrum. And that includes things like Dungeons and Dragons, Call of Cthulhu, games that are largely story-based, narrative-driven. They are less focused on mechanisms and rolling dice and all of that, where Call of Cthulhu really is not a combat-focused game. Dungeons and Dragons is a little bit more, it shows its tabletop wargaming roots. You can get into games in the middle, like The King's Dilemma, which is a board game, but also has clear narrative, story, role-playing elements, and then all the way to the other end, where people can play chess, tic-tac-toe, Azul, things that are abstract, very, very board game type things. And these are going to appeal to different people. So how do we solve that to make sure that I'm going to run a class that appeals to the broadest number? So I'll give you 3 options. Option 1 is just do RPGs only. On the right in the blue box, you could see the actual description that was posted for a recent class that I ran. And it was focused on create your own one-page tabletop RPG. So if people are familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, they're familiar with RPGs, most people are familiar with, or at least have heard of those. And that's going to increase that attraction to it. It also has a lower barrier to actually creating games. If you are making a board game, there's usually components in a box and all sorts of physical bits that go with it. An RPG can literally be a single sheet of paper, or in the case of the class that we did, just one page front and back, and you can have a whole contained game. So it's a little easier to produce something. Solo RPGs and journaling games are increasingly popular. So this is a topic that I think has a lot of resonance with people. And like I said, there's just less components. It's easy to prototype. You could try stuff out with your friends. You really don't need too much to do it. And if you have a multi-session, you can probably completely finish the game by the end. The other end of the spectrum is you can do board games only. And you're going to attract a different group, and it's just as good. And if you have, like my library does, a local board game group that meets every Monday at the library, you will have a natural audience that you could bring in and sort of cross-pollinate between the two. Board games are this huge topic that you can explore many sessions. You could do war games or abstract games, all sorts of things. But like I said, they're a little bit more, they're large to try to show demos, they're more expensive, and you're probably not going to finish an actual board game by the end of it. So the third option is kind of try to do everything. And this is what I did for the first one that I ran, and just called it the Introduction to Tabletop Game Design. And in the blue box, again, this is the description that actually went out. And I think one of the things to call out is, and I'll reiterate this later, is to make sure that people understand that no experience is required. Because a lot of times in things like this, people will think, oh, well, I don't play a lot of board games. I certainly can't design a game. So I think it's important to explicitly say there's no experience required. As long as you have some enthusiasm for it, even if you've only ever played one game, you'll still get something out of it. Using this approach can potentially give you the best of both worlds, right? So now you're attracting Dungeons and Dragons players. You're also attracting people who want to play Wingspan, and that could be the best of both worlds. It also could be the worst, though, because depending on how it's structured, when you talk about role-playing games, board game people aren't interested, and we talk about the opposite, the other group is not interested. So you need to find enough content that's going to be both general enough that it appeals to everyone, and yet specific enough to be useful. So that's kind of the two ways to look at this. When you're setting it up, you could either do a super narrow scope, just pick one type of game and really dive into it. You will get people who are really interested in it, and it's probably easier to pick the material for it. Or you could try to do a broad scope. You're going to cover everything, but now you've got to be really careful when picking the materials to make sure that's going to appeal. So what's worked for me is and you'll see this in the games I design, I don't think the line between tabletop role-playing games and board games is as clear or as bright of a line as most people think. And I think if we choose topics carefully, we could appeal to both. So that ties into tip number 2, which is topics that appeal to all types of games. So I've done 3 types of classes so far. One is cover everything, intro to tabletop game design. The other type is make your own one-page RPG, very, very specifically targeted, not just RPGs, but just one-page ones. And then also a crash course in game design, but mostly focused just on board games. I think all presentations have to have at least one Venn diagram. So here's mine. So if you have tabletop role-playing games and board games, there is a core of game design fundamentals that I think apply to that. In fact, we could probably add video games onto this as well. And that core of game design fundamentals will appeal to all of them. So, like I said, there's fundamentals that I think you could pick that would work. And this is kind of what I would recommend. So I'm going to go through a few of these topics. Now, I'm not going to teach you everything about these topics. This is not a game design course, but I want to at least introduce you to some ideas so that if you do want to run a class, you'd be able to come back, reference this presentation, or maybe if you're taking notes, just have a couple ideas of, okay, well, what could I cover that is going to have broad appeal? The first one is going to be the different kinds of fun. So Marc LeBlanc has a paper published on this, and he identifies 8 different kinds of fun when playing games. So it could be the sensation of like holding dice and having cool minis and like dice towers and all sorts of fun little bits and bobs. Or it could be narrative, where you're telling a story and that's what you want with something epic and emotional. Or it could just be the challenge and you want a super hard game that's going to be tough to do. This topic has had very good resonance when I've taught it. It moves people away from just saying a game is fun or not fun, which usually isn't too helpful, and more to like a directed vocabulary where we could talk about games. And now we can say, hey, this game really emphasizes narrative and fellowship, or some of these specific kinds. And then I'll go over some hands-on exercises as well, but this is a chance that we can pick some of our favorite games, start to categorize them. So that's worked really well. The next one is types of players. Again, there's many different models for this. You can use Bartle's taxonomy, you can use the Quantic gamer motivations. But what you could do is allow people to think about, well, what kind of gamer am I? Do I want to interact on the world and I want to do an exploration game? Or do I want to act upon other players and be a super competitive player and I want to play to win and I want head-to-head confrontation? Again, it moves people toward a directed vocabulary and the ability to think about what types of fun can be in a game and what types of players may want to play those. So you could start to answer the question of like, what kind of game would I want to design? Other things include core game loops and just the idea that you can break a game down into some simple steps and almost flow chart it out to show that a game is almost always a repeating loop of events or steps that you do. And theme and mechanism. Even though most people have played games, they don't really think about how thematic elements add to a game more than just window dressing, right? Like Risk could be represented as just dots on a grid in a network diagram, but it's only when you start to put it on a map and have pieces and those thematic elements that make it engaging. So again, could do some hands-on exercises with that as well. Player agency. This is the one, if I had to pick just one of them to cover, I think you could do a single session pretty easily and make it really interesting. Agency is how you design meaningful choices in a game. And does the player have multiple options to choose from? Do they have the ability to choose or act upon one of those options? And then also, does that option or choice influence the game state? Did it actually change anything? And we could talk about things like Candyland, where you're just drawing a card and moving, almost zero agency, no choice there. But also then do some hands-on exercises where we add agency. Again, this is another example I'll talk about when we get to hands-on examples. Game arcs are another one. Just like a good play will normally have 3 acts, where you sort of have the beginning where you're just setting things up, some big inciting incident, some big change, and then resolution as it falls, as it ends, sort of your denouement. I think that's another topic that applies to video games, role-playing games, board games, everything. And then depending on how you want to structure this, I think design and layout also fit into it. When we did the one-page role-playing game classes, this is something that I spent some time on, just introducing people to, like, using Affinity Publisher or other desktop publishing software, where to get public domain art, so you can get free art that's able to use and you can make your games look good. Or showing examples like the one there where Merkborg, a pretty well-known role-playing game, uses public domain art pretty extensively in the book. So again, this is a topic that applies to both role-playing games, board games, and I think those are skills that would be transferable. And then also play testing. So this is one that I didn't cover in great detail in most of the ones that I've run. But there's internal, local blind play testing, all sorts of, like, how do you ask good questions of the people who have tried your game? Again, this is going to apply to role-playing games. It'll apply to board games. This same thing would almost apply to video games as well. So there's a couple hands-on exercises that we were able to do with this. And then pitching is something I've only recently added to classes, but the response has been pretty good to it. Not everybody's going to want to pitch their game to a board game publisher. They're not going to have, a pitching session scheduled at PAX Unplugged or something. But the concept of pitching allows people to communicate about their games and be able to succinctly say, hey, this is my game. You're a monster hunter in 1700s London, and the beast is coming in. You need to prepare for it, right? How to make an engaging pitch that has a hook. That's something people really struggle with. And there's some hands-on activities I think that people can do. This fits really well into almost any type of game design class you might do. And the last one's publishing. So again, in the one-page RPG, our goal was to go from I've never made a game before to I have a published game on itch.io and people can download it and play it. So that requires some knowledge of how to set things up. And then if you do want to go to print, you could probably teach an entire class just on that, as far as like CMYK colors and bleed and safe zones and all of that. But again, this is going to be a topic that applies to almost everything. So if you've picked your scope and you know what topics you want to cover, you have to have a format that's going to fit that content. And that's tip number 3 on how do I structure this thing. So there's a ton of options. I'm just going to go through a couple of the sort of polar opposites. There is no right answer to this. So I'm not going to get to the end and say this is what you should or must do, but some things to think about. Again, that's one of the promo things that was posted on social media for the class that I taught. Most people can only commit to a single class. It is hard for most people to say, I'm going to show up every Saturday for 3 weeks, or every Thursday night for 4 weeks in a row, I'm going to show up to a class. That's tough. But the downside of a single class is it's just going to be high-level information. It's going to be really hard to actually finish something, and it almost turns into sort of a webinar in person. It's going to be high-level information, whereas a multiple session one, you can actually work on a project and complete something, which is really satisfying and can be awesome. In fact, in the last one, it was 4 sessions, but we skipped a week to give people 2 weeks to actually work on their stuff. A large one or a small class. So if you're doing just a lecture, it can be 1,000 people, right? Like, it doesn't matter how many people are in that room. But if you want to do hands-on activities, if you want to have more time for questions, those things don't scale necessarily. When I did that first class, I was hoping to get 8 people in the room. I had no idea. I didn't know who was going to show up. And then that maxed out. I think I said I didn't want more than like 15 or so, but we got people on the wait list, and I said, sure, we could do 20. And then they said, well, can we do 25? And the first night of class, I think we had like 26 or 27 people there. It worked out fine, and I was thrilled by the response. But it does make each hands-on activity take longer, so you have to allow for that. So a large class or a small one, there's no right answer, but some of those parts don't necessarily scale. Weekdays and weekends. I have personally done everything on weeknights, and that's worked out well for me. I think most people can get away with doing that. Weekends, particularly people with, families, kids, and activities, that's tough to get away to do that. So I would probably recommend weekdays and weekday evenings, but make sure you're allowing time for people to get off of work. People's jobs end at different times. I probably wouldn't want to start something much before, 6, 7 o'clock, somewhere in there. Weekends do have the advantage that you could start earlier. You could have a bigger block of time. And then the distinction between like a workshop and a lecture. To me, a lecture is mostly just talking and information. Somebody's going to be there, they're talking, they're sharing their information. You can ask questions, and that's how the information is transferred. A workshop, to me, is more hands-on, and you have a targeted goal. To me, my first class was more of a lecture with some activities. The one-page RPG was more of a workshop. Like, we had a goal, and we were going to learn some skills, do some hands-on stuff, and we will end up with a game at the end of it. I think blended approaches work. So for a workshop, I think it's going to be really hard to do that in a single session unless you have like a long Saturday or something. So I think multiple sessions is probably a good fit for that. So like I said, I don't think there's one right answer, but I do get asked this question a lot. So what would I recommend? Here's what I'd recommend. Is either multiple session workshop with a very specific goal, like I said, or a single session and just make it a crash course in game design and cover things like player agency and game arcs, game loops, things like that. I think weeknight sessions are good. I would cap them at 75 minutes. Weeknights have worked for me, but that said, the next 2 classes I have coming up are both going to be on weekends. I think it is hard to listen to anybody talk for more than about 20 to 40 minutes. So I would try to increase the hands-on activities as much as possible. You could save a little bit of time. I would make sure I got there early, hand out all the handouts and stuff so it's sitting at people's tables ready to go, so you're not wasting time on that. And then the one thing I didn't count on is people wanting to discuss things after the class. So there was probably an extra 15, 20, 30 minutes of people wanting to chat after the class that you should just budget into your time as well. All right, so tip number 4 is use hands-on activities. And this is one that I would stress a lot. So games are interactive. So it seems silly to sit there and not have the class be interactive as well. Like if people want to play games, it's because they like interacting with systems. To me, I would throw in at least one hands-on activity that gets people either to stand up or do something active at least once every 45 minutes of class. When I run things, I try to do a let's try it after each concept. So if we learn about types of fun, we're going to do an activity. If we learn about types of players, we're going to do an activity. If we learn about game loops, we're going to try an activity. They don't have to be complicated, and I'll cover those next. But you can see that some of them are super simple, but it still gets people to stand up, move around a little, and actually interact with it. I already mentioned the logistics. Materials for these things, I've always brought my own, but you don't need much. You can get cheap packs of dice pretty readily, some paper, some pens, even if you're just getting sheets of paper and tearing them up into roughly card-sized bits. If you are at a library, you don't need a lot of fancy equipment. A whiteboard, some tables, if you have a projector and a screen, and some room to work, that's really all you need for this. So again, people have asked me, so what are some activities I could do to break up the class? So here's 5 that you can try. The first one's the 8 kinds of fun, and this is what it looks like. Takes maybe 10 minutes or less, and you just need some Post-it notes, and we go over what the 8 kinds of fun are, and then have people think of their favorite games. And if they've even never played a board game before, well, what's their favorite video game or anything? And then think about what kind of fun that is most tied to, right? So if you have a super competitive game like Unmatched or something, that would be Challenge, probably. And they're going to write that game name on there. And then we're going to post it on a board under one of those 8 types of fun. Really simple activity, but it gets people to think about their specific games, what kinds they like, what kind of fun that's tied to. Again, moving toward that directed vocabulary. And then getting up, and we could see instantly in the class, like, hey, are more people into discovery games? Are they more into challenges? Do we have everybody loves narrative games? It starts to tie that class together a little bit. Activity 2 is what type of player you are. And this is an example of the handout that I used. And again, it's a quick activity. Get some Post-it notes, teach people about Bartle's taxonomy on, killers, socializers, explorers, achievers, different groups. Have people think about what types of games they enjoy. Pick one, and then pick their type of player, and then throw it up on the board. And again, it doesn't need to be fancy, but this one does 2 things. Number one, again, it ties that class together, and we could start to see what types of players we have in the class. But also we could blend 2 of those models. So we could see like, hey, if I think I'm a bard or a ninja or an architect or a gladiator type player, how does that fit in the overall structure on sort of these quadrants? The next one is what I've called the theme-o-matic. And this one we've had fun with as well. And it is just a table. You can see that on the right. This is the one we use. And you roll 2 dice. And you roll a d6 and a d12, or 6-sided and 12-sided die. And that's going to land you somewhere on this table. So let's say I rolled a 1 and a 2. That's going to be space. And if I roll again, that's going to be, let's say, a 3 and a 7 and ghost. All right. So now my theme for my game is going to be something with space ghosts, right? And you can get some funny combinations. You get jungle frogs, dragon ninjas, underwater robots, all that kind of thing. But again, when you're teaching about theme versus mechanism and retheming games and applying thematic elements, it's a fun, quick way to be able to do that. People usually get a kick out of it. And it allows people to, when you combine that with rolling on a table for some random mechanisms, now you can have people try wacky pitches, right? Like I'm making a card drafting game about underwater robots racing to recover a sunken treasure or something, right? So again, fun activity, low, no cost, pretty easy to do. And activity number 4 is what I call the worst dungeon crawl ever. And this one does take a little bit longer. It's a little bit more involved, but it's probably the one that people seem to have enjoyed the most when I've done it. And in this activity, you're going to take 10, 10 cards. I have done it, actually, I'll skip ahead, just with sheets of paper and you're writing on them. Or if you're really pressed for time, like I was at a recent class, I made up some cards ahead of time so that people could just use them and we don't need to spend time on putting them together. The art on these cards is by Evelyn Moreau. It's fantastic art. People got a kick out of it as well. So either make your own cards during the class as part of the activity, or you can make the cards ahead of time. And then what we're going to do is try some iterative design with them. So the goal of this is to illustrate player agency, the ability to make meaningful choices, the ability to affect the game state by what you're choosing to do in the game. And we're going to do that through 3 iterative designs. The first one is going to have 0 agency. And then we're going to modify it a little bit. And then we're going to modify it a little bit more. And then we can actually try some of what we've learned about player agency to analyze that game and think about it a little bit more. So the way this works, the first iteration, basically you have a start and an end card, and you're going to randomly distribute some of your cards. Each of them has an effect. The theme doesn't necessarily matter. You'll gain hit points, you'll lose hit points as you go. But the rule is you can only move left to right, and each time you land on a card, you're going to resolve it. Obviously, this is Candyland, but worse, kind of. So you're just going to move through, and immediately people will start to see broken game states, like move back 1 space. Well, you'll never reach the end, or it's just there's no agency whatsoever. So then we try it as a second iteration, and this time we shuffle the cards and we place them face down, and now you don't know what's coming, but the rule is you still have to move left to right and reveal 1 card at each time. So as you do that, you move your little token. We usually use a die to track hit points, and you're going to flip those cards up. And most people will agree that the game's still particularly bad, but it's slightly more fun because at least you don't know what's coming. Again, slightly better, but still 0 agency. And then the next one is we're going to add a little bit more agency to it. And you are going to go from the start, and you can move up, down, left, right as you go. So in this case, the cards are shuffled. They are placed face down. You don't know what's going to be there. And each time you are able to move north, south, east, west. And as you move, now you can at least move a slightly different direction, right? Now we've introduced some player agency. Most people would agree this is still a bad game, right? Like this is not something that's particularly good. But almost everybody will agree that it's better than that first iteration was, and it's better than the second iteration was. So it teaches a couple concepts. It teaches iterative design, where you start with a broken mess of a game, you modify it a little, it's slightly better, you modify it some more. And it also introduces the idea that adding even the tiniest bit of player agency can help improve a game. So even though it's still bad, it's a little better than the first one. And then the next one is what I call the game pitch Mad Lib. And this gets into how to communicate about games. So in this one, again, pretty minimal materials. There's a handout sheet that's just a paper that you could easily print, a couple pens. And then this works well at the end of a workshop or at the end of a class. As people have thought about theme, as they thought about what mechanisms they want, maybe if it's a multi-session, what game they've actually produced at this point, they're going to go through and fill in the top part of this. So the game name, a 1-sentence pitch, try to keep it down to just 10 words. The number of players, is it for kids? Is it for adults? Playtime, what's the duration of the game? Is this a 15-minute quick thing, or is this a 4-hour large game? What are the touchstones or inspirations? Is it inspired by a book or a movie or other games or a genre of games? And who the game's for. This is something that I try to stress with people is knowing who you're making this game for. And it could be yourself, it could be your friends, it could be for the class. But what types of players is it for? What types of fun are you trying to achieve? And then finally, sort of that narrative hook, where you are a botanist going into a forest to document plants and get out before it's too late, or you are a demon selling cursed items in a curiosity shop and trying not to raise suspicion. What is that narrative hook? So after they fill in the top part of this, you can just take those and drop them right into sort of a Mad Lib style script. And then we would take turns pitching those. So we actually like get up and you read your pitch. What that does is, number one, it gives people a clear, concise way to communicate about the game, something that I have found people really, really struggle with. And number two, it gives them a safe way to be able to get up and talk in front of a class too, right? People don't want to just be left out there and say, hey, now you're going to talk about your game. Literally, all you have to do is read off a sheet of paper. That makes it a little more comfortable, a little easier for people. And by the end of it, they'll have done a game pitch, right? And you can get some feedback from other people in the class. This one has worked particularly well. All right, so we went through the scope, we went through some topics, we picked a format for our class, we have a bunch of hands-on activities that we can do. So the fifth and final topic is promoting this. Because, and I will stress this, nothing I said matters if nobody knows about the workshop. So, because if nobody shows up, nobody knows about it, then it doesn't matter if you pick board games or RPGs or had a really cool hands-on activity lined up. None of that matters. So even though this is number 5, this is sort of foundational to all of it. So these tips, I'm sure if you're used to doing library promotion and activities, they're going to sound very familiar. But just because they're obvious doesn't mean everybody does them. So the first tip is start early. I can't stress this one enough. So I would say at least 3 months before the workshop, you should be promoting this. And I know that sounds like a long time. I know that sounds crazy. But the way social media works is, you're not reaching everybody on each communication, right? You post it on your Facebook page. Somebody may not see that for a week or 2 weeks, or you post it 3 times. It may be a month until they see it. So there's this lag between communication and people actually seeing things. People need to be able to plan their lives. So if it's a 3-session class on Thursday nights, they need to make sure they're not scheduling other stuff for that. So my rule of thumb would be you have to promote it at least 3 months before the workshop. If you're getting down to like the 1 month, 30 days out, I would have serious concerns about people being able to attend. Promo tip number 2 is digital and physical channels. I know like Facebook is where a lot of people get their information about activities. That's where I get information about businesses, what my library is doing. But it's just so scattered that you don't know who you're reaching at any given time. There's been a lot of times I've seen an activity on Facebook and it was last weekend, or it was last week and I've already missed it. So if you can, obviously physical postings in the library, digital postings on library channels, digital postings on other social media channels, putting flyers in local game stores, and just kind of doing both and as much as possible. And yeah, so we'll get to that. So number 3 is, and I mentioned this before, is emphasize the no experience required. I know a lot of the people, not a lot, but a fair number of people in the classes I've run have said that they've never made a game before. They didn't really play a lot of board games. They didn't play any RPGs, but they thought the class sounded like fun. And they felt comfortable showing up because we emphasize that you don't need to be a game designer. You don't need experience. In fact, 2 people that showed up had very little interest in games, to be honest. They were writers. They wanted creative writing ideas, and it sounded like this could be a way that they could spark their creativity for that, which is awesome, right? But without having an explicit invitation to people who don't have that experience, I'm not sure they would have shown up. So again, tip number 3 is no experience required, and also focus on that creativity, the idea of making something during class, rather than a passive learning of something. I think you will be doing some lecture, you will be doing some talking and that kind of learning. But I think it's the emphasis on, hey, you can make something and you don't need any experience. That's what's going to get people to show up. Number 4 for promo is to partner with the community. And this is things that it's a little bit tougher, right? Walking into your local board game store or local game stores or hobby shops and asking if you could put up flyers. That was very impactful in that first tabletop gaming class. The people at my library actually got on a podcast and talked about this coming up. Trying to get into school gaming groups. I went through and found some local board gaming groups, reached out to the people running them and asked if they could share out to the people in their groups that were running a class. This one had probably the most impactful ability in getting people into the class, is reaching out to specific groups and having those groups communicate to their populations like, hey, there's this class going on, you should check it out. And number 5 is just keep reminding people. So people forget, they'll see it once and say, oh, that sounds good, I'm going to show up to that, and then forget about it. So however, sometimes you could automate this in a registration system, but just keep posting about it, keep reminding people. Again, throwing something on Facebook once or twice is not going to work particularly well. So you really need to just keep reminding people over and over again. As the organizer of an event, it may feel like you're saying it too much, right? Like that you're being a burden, you're being a pest. But you got to remember, from the recipient end, they may only see 1 out of every 10 of those reminders. So again, you just have to keep emphasizing that. So with that, that's kind of my 5 things that I would recommend for workshops is define a scope. Sort of, are you going to do board games, RPGs, both, everything? Choose your topics, and I would recommend that sort of core of game design that works for almost all games, whether they're board games, RPGs, video games. Pick a workshop format that's going to work, and that could be single session, multi-session. Again, it depends what you want. There's no right answer there. I would stress to do hands-on activities. I gave you 5 examples of things you can do. Most of them are low or no cost versus lectures. And then promote early and often. Again, I would say 3 months at a minimum. If you're going to run something, it is worth pushing something out farther to make sure that people can actually attend. A couple resources. I know this will be recorded, so if this is on YouTube, you could like pause it and check these out. Like I said, I write at Skeleton Code Machine, and a lot of the material I use in classes comes directly from Skeleton Code Machine articles. I have had multiple college professors tell me that they use articles from there as part of their curriculum in game design type things. It's all free, so that's a pretty easy one to do. Also, the Make Your Own One-Page RPG book is, you could read it online there for free, which almost gives you an exact curriculum that you could drop into a workshop. I write about library stuff at the ENNIE-nominated newsletter. So when I do things at libraries, I always do a little post-mortem on them. What went well, what didn't go well, some tips on like, hey, how would I run this stuff? So again, if you want more of my unsolicited advice on this kind of thing, you can read that there. TTRPG Kids is not my website. That is run by Steph, and it is a fantastic resource for working with RPGs and gaming. with kids in educational and library settings, I would strongly recommend that. And the Riot Games, if you know League of Legends, it's that studio, they have what they call their Earth Academy Online, and that has, if you want to skew a little bit more toward video games, but still be in that core of game design that applies to everything, fantastic activities there, particularly on player agency, where you could actually like make little games with tanks and stuff on paper. And it's a fantastic resource if you want more ideas for hands-on activities. I would strongly recommend that. And then I just want to call out 3 books really quickly if you do want to read more about this. Sarah Shipp's book on thematic integration and board game design, fantastic. It gets into that theme versus mechanism and stuff that I was very impactful for me. Amabel Holland's book on cardboard ghosts, if you want to get a little bit more into games that have something to say, that they are challenging, that they break the mold of most games where they may not have explicit victory conditions and instead simulate some sort of historical thing, I would strongly recommend that book. And the last one's Jeff Engelstein's Building Blocks of Tabletop Game Design. And that one's not a book you're going to read from beginning to end, but as you get to specific mechanisms like worker placement or drafting cards, again, that's a extremely valuable resource. And that's it. That's all I had. So this is my contact information. I am happy, like if you are out there and you're like, hey, I want to run a class, but I have questions or something, I'm more than happy to take an email or whatever. I am on the Gaming Roundtable Discord server for the ALA, and I'm Pursued by a Bear is my username on there. And I think that is it. So I think we have maybe 7 minutes for questions. So.
Yep, and we have at least a few here, so I will go ahead and read those for you. Morgan says, I went through your website and really loved the Book of Experiments. Talks about how they used it, and then the question is, would you consider some of these fundamentals applicable to content like that?
Yeah, so the Book of Experiments is something I had put together a while ago. It's actually like a 1-page trifold. And what I did is I went through some historic cookbooks or recipe books or remedy books from, let's say, I'm blanking on it. I think it's like 1600s, 1700s maybe. And at those time, those books were blended, right? Like remedies and recipes and everything were the same thing. I took those and then added some stats to them so that they would work with the Fallen RPG. So it's a game. So it's this mixture of actual historical stuff and then tied into a gaming system. So I think the gaming fundamentals do apply to that to some extent, particularly in the idea of like theming and mechanisms, because it's doing both of that, right? So it is taking a theme of sort of that 1700s natural remedies type thing, and then applying mechanical impacts to each of those. So it might be an actual remedy for blurred vision, which is one of them, but then we can add a mechanical impact to it where, okay, so how does that show up in the game? Okay, so it restores like vision impairment things for this many rounds or whatever. So yeah, I'd say it applies to both.
Okay. And then Nick asks, if the goal of a workshop series is everyone creates a game by the end, what advice would you give the attendees? And then the second part is, what common pitfalls do new designers fall into when creating their first game?
Okay, no, those are good questions. So the first one was how do we get people to finish a game by the end, right? And the answer to that is it has to be highly structured. This is not a, hey, I'm going to teach you some random stuff, and by the end, well, make a game and hope for the best. It is, again, if you check out that Make Your Own 1-page RPG, it is very structured. And like we start with, okay, step 1 is you're going to determine what kind of fun you want. Step 2 is you're going to determine what kind of players you want to appeal to. And then we're going to pick a theme for that game. Then we're going to apply some mechanisms to that game. And then we're going to make sure we have a good game loop. So each one of those is a specific step that we're going to take that whole class and we're all going to start and we're all going to finish that step together. So no one ever falls behind. So then by the end, you've done it. But there's no one giant task, right? You just keep breaking that big task of make a game, which is unmanageable, down into smaller and smaller granular tasks that you could do as a group together to make sure nobody gets left behind. And I already forgot the second question. What was that?
Oh, all right, it was with chat. What common pitfalls do new designers fall into when creating their first games?
Oh, I mean, if I had to pick two, I would say if you have no experience in game design and your experience has been like Monopoly, Candyland, like the classic games like that, is a lack of player agency where you may be rolling dice and doing things, but the randomness outweighs any decision the player makes. I think that's a big one. I think the other one is designing games that don't end or end in a timely manner. And that's something we cover as far as like, how do you force the game to end when you want it to so it doesn't run forever? And the third one is just the ability to communicate about their game. Most people want to start with the lore. They want to start with the big story and the backstory and all of that. And just getting people to flip that on its head and start with a hook and then tell me all the other stuff. So I'd say adding enough agency, making sure the game ends, and then being able to communicate about it in a sentence.
All right. Well, those are all the questions we've got
Okay.
so far. Rebecca was graciously putting links to most of those resources at the end in the chat, so those should all be there for everyone. I am going to drop the link one more time if you need an LU for today. And if you do have any other questions while I'm doing that, feel free to add those to the chat. If not, we thank you all for coming and hope to see. Okay, do you have a suggested number of sessions for the one-page RPG workshop?
So I did 4 sessions and that worked out well. So it worked. I do wonder, could I have crammed it into 3 sessions if I made them just a little bit longer? I would say there's zero chance of doing it in just 2 sessions. So from my experience at the pace that I would want to cover things, I would say 4, absolutely. 3, maybe. I think 5 would probably be excessive. So somewhere in there is the right answer. Yeah, that's it. That's another good question though.
All right, we're getting a lot of good thank yous. Looks like we can stop the recording, Lisa.
Okay.